Shalom, WJC family. It's time for our weekly Torah Talk. This week I'm going to do something a little unusual. I want to share the sermon that I gave last week for Parshat Terumah for two reasons. One, I think it applies still to Parshat Tetzaveh as we're learning about the building of the Tabernacle and now the garments that the functionaries, the Kohanim in the Tabernacle would wear. And also because it was snowing and there weren't that many people in synagogue, and I thought that these ideas were worth sharing. So, with that, I'd like you to try and picture in your mind's eye a classroom. The students are paired up for Talmudic debate. Their dialectic centered on a paraphrased verse from Deuteronomy. Money improperly earned may not be donated to church. The room erupted into impassioned pleas and gesticulations. Then two students were chosen to debate in front of the class. The class concluded with the recitation of a psalm. None of that sounds particularly surprising, right? It could be describing almost any number of yeshivas within an hour of the Westchester Jewish Center or all over Israel. However, you may be more surprised to hear that where what was being described was taking place. It was in about an hour's drive north of Seoul in the Gwangju Mountains, where nearly 50 South Korean children were poring over a book. It was a Korean version of the Talmud. Sanguk Bae, 17, sat on one side of the debate with one palm on the ground and the other hand waving a Bible in the air, arguing that the law was the law, and the Bible was not open to interpretation. Min Kwan, 16, was on the other side, countering that God loves everyone and forgives easily. Apparently, in Korea, the Talmud is a bestseller. This description is an excerpt from a New Yorker article from June 23, 2015, called How the Talmud Became a Bestseller in South Korea by Ross Arbus. And these are not Jewish kids. They're Christian kids. But something about the Talmud makes it important in Korean culture. And not just for Koreans. The Talmud is, in fact, more widely read today than perhaps ever before, both inside and outside the Jewish community. What is it about the Talmud that makes it more and more read and accepted today? Next week on Friday night, we will be joined by author and editor at large at Tablet Magazine, Leah Leibovitz. He will be talking about his recent book, How the Talmud Can Change Your Life. The Cantor and I have been reading it together. Actually, I have it right here. How the Talmud Can Change Your Life. Surprisingly modern advice from a very old book. And in it, he describes what the Talmud is really about, or at least his theory, or the one he quotes, says that the Talmud is about coping with change and the inevitable doubt that comes with change, whether that's for Koreans or Jews or anyone else. How does it work, right? And let's see, this is what the Talmud looks like. It's behind me now that I think about it. So these are what volumes of the Talmud look like, different versions of it, right? So what makes it so capable of helping people deal with change and doubt? He describes in a country haunted by its past and left with few, if any, common goals for the future, a book devoted to scrutinizing the judgment of your elders without discarding the traditions and teachings that has kept them united as a people goes a long way. Right, the Talmud is a book that is all about sort of adjudicating the past that has led us to this point of change without dismissing the value of the past. Leibovitz describes the imagined intergenerational debate of the Talmud this way. Every page, he says, is an exercise in literary imagination. The same sort of what-if game that excites children when they clutch their comic books and heatedly debate whether Thor, say, could ever overcome the Incredible Hulk in a fight. I have not heard in the past rabbis compared to superheroes. Maybe that should be the goal. If one day, I can be compared to Iron Man, I'll know I've made it. But it's true that these arguments from famous rabbis of the past, heroic rabbis, and those reading along quote the rabbis and pit them against one another just as the text was constructed to do, even though they never lived at the same time. A conversation that continues in the margins of the Talmud as commentators debate what the rabbis in the text are talking about. And here's where Leibovitz really gets to the good part. He says, even more intricate, however, than the debate within the Talmud, is the third broken barrier between the sages of the Talmud and us, the readers. The anonymous voice following the great words of the rabbis is an invitation for us all to join in the fun. A reminder that in a sugya, the literary unit of rabbinic argument in the Talmud, that a sugya is not there to be definitively resolved by the ancient and the wise and the deceased, but it's there for us, the living, to engage with it whether we're believers or non-believers, Jewish or otherwise. In other words, the genius of the Talmud is in the fact that it very rarely comes to conclusions. It takes the debate of ancient rabbis and leaves it open-ended. A favorite ending of a sugya in the Talmud is teku, which means, we don't know. We don't know the answer. It's almost asking us to give our opinions. And suddenly, as we enter into that conversation, we are engaged in this conversation. More than that, we encounter the sacred in that argumentation. The truth is that God isn't in the words of Torah or the words of Talmud, but God is encountered as we engage in those words of Talmud, as we debate them, as we make them our own. Something sacred happens above the page that was not there before, and in that I might even say we encounter the divine, that's where we encounter God, in the actual debate over Torah. It's an incredible thing, an amazing idea that wherever we are, in whatever state, crisis or peace, with or without a country, divided or united, joyful or in mourning, we can engage at the highest levels of sanctity. We can engage in the feeling, the sense of the presence of God among us. Or for those non-believers who might be watching this, the presence of sacred wisdom and divine inspiration and holy wisdom, just by answering the invitation of the text to engage. So where does this idea come from? Where do we get the idea that we can package up sanctity in something portable and move it around from place to place? Whether that's text or some sacred objects, perhaps? Of course, it's from the Parshiot we are reading now, Terumah and Tetzaveh, and the ones at the end of Shemot. As we read about the construction of the tabernacle, we are being given a great gift. It's saying that sanctity is not in one place. We don't only encounter God at Sinai, and when the temple will be built, we won't only encounter God in the temple. But if we have the sacred tools, we can encounter God anywhere. And that is the gift of Torah learning. When the temple is destroyed, the Jews find that portable connection to God in the words of the Torah and then the argumentation of the Talmud. Just as the tabernacle had its structure, but what really made it sacred was what happened in it, the rituals and the encounter with something sacred that is otherwise hidden in the world. So too, the scroll of the Torah is not sacred. It's a book. Even the words in it are not, by their very nature, holy or sacred. They're just gallnut juice written on parchment. What makes the Torah sacred is what we do with it, how we encounter it. It's in the discussion and the debate, the weighing of opinions and values. That's where we again encounter the divine and the holy, even outside of our promised land, even outside of a time when the temple exists. It isn't the words that are sacred any more than the mountain of Sinai was holy in and of itself. It is how the words draw us into an encounter with something greater. That is where the holiness lies. We live in pretty crazy times. If Talmud learning is bringing comfort to Korean school children, how much more so to us who are the progeny of those who created it? Alachat kama v'kama, as the Talmud's argumentation would say. Right? If it's true for that one, how much more so for us? There's even more for those of us who have never held a Talmud before. There is, even for those of us who have never held a Talmud before, even for those of us who have never engaged in Jewish learning before, even for those of us who could care less about ancient practices like animal sacrifice and purity laws that are at the heart of the Torah, even for those of us who aren't so sure about God or Judaism or religion, there is something sacred to find there. That's why you can find it in Korea, not only in Israel or in yeshivas here in America. There is a famous story about a great rabbinic sage. And when there was a real crisis among the Jewish people, that sage would go to a special spot in the woods and there would do a special ritual and would recite a unique special prayer. And God would see the special place and the sacred ritual and the unique prayer, and God would answer it. Well, a generation passed, and the next rabbi came along. And the next rabbi couldn't remember the place in the woods, was never taught it. So when the Jews would have a terrible, terrible calamity, when they would be threatened, that rabbi would do the ritual and recite the prayer and say, God, I don't remember where the place is in the woods, but this will have to be enough. And it was. Well, the next generation comes along, and the rabbi then didn't remember the sacred ritual. And so he would say the prayer, and he would say, Kadosh Baruch Hu, right? Blessed Holy One. I don't remember the place in the woods, and I don't know the sacred ritual, but I have the prayer, and that will have to be enough. And the next generation passed, and the rabbi didn't remember the prayer either. And so he would just say to God, look, I don't remember the place in the woods, and we no longer have the sacred ritual, and I don't remember the unique prayer. But I remember that we once did that, and that will have to be enough. That is our generation. We remember. The Talmud gives us that gift of remembering these ancient practices, of keeping them sacred, of debating them, of holding them dear, and that remembering and debating the values that are in it, that sustains us, even in a world when most of it is no longer possible to do. What we are really talking about is why it's no longer possible to do and what that means to us and how we still incorporate those values into our lives. And so I want to invite you not only to come to hear Leah Leibovitz at Westchester Jewish Center on Friday night, but also to read his book, How the Talmud Can Change Your Life, and also to read this book, The Talmud. Right? Engage in study. There are so many ways to engage in Jewish learning right now. Here at WJC, on podcasts that go through the Talmud in dozens of different ways, a page a day, or through certain topics. There are all kinds of rabbis teaching about all kinds of things: environmental Talmud, feminist Talmud, queer Talmud, just Talmud. There's something in these books for everyone, and there is a teacher, a rabbi for everyone. And so I invite you take advantage of that which has sustained us from the time of the tabernacle until today. This our portable vessel of sacredness, that when we engage with it, with our minds and with our speech and with our heart, can take us to those same sacred places as we read about in the Talmud, in the Torah portions these weeks, as they did in the tabernacle, because we remember. And that will have to be enough. And so far, as Jewish history proves, it has been. Shabbat Shalom.